It's time for me to give you guys my SEC record predictions for the upcoming college football season. We got to get into it. We're going to start off with the Arkansas Razorbacks. I got them going 0-8 in conference play, 3-9 overall. Outside of the easy gimmies that they have and they're out of conference, I don't see this squad having too much success this year. We know Sam Pittman's on the hot seat. He hired Bobby Petrino to be his offensive coordinator. Don't really see that working out. You lost KJ Jefferson, one of the better quarterbacks that Arkansas has had in recent memory, to UCF via the portal. You replace him with Trenton Green. Trenton Green is nice on College Football 25, but in real life, think of DJ Uiagalelei, but way more athletic. And that's Trenton Green. He's inconsistent as a passer. He has inconsistent footwork. He's not really that accurate. His numbers at Boise State are a little bit inflated because of the weaker competition that they faced off against. But I just don't really see it with Arkansas this year. Not only are they lacking talent at wide receiver, but they also have some huge concerns defensively. This is possibly going to be the worst team in the SEC this year. And normally it's Vanderbilt, but Arkansas, they kind of hold the cake to Vandy this year. I think they end up going 3-9, and they don't win a single game in conference play. And we probably see Sam Pittman fired around week 6, week 7 of the year. Vanderbilt, we got them up next. I have them finishing with a better record than Arkansas at 4-8. 1-7 in conference play. Clark Lee is a really likable guy, but it's so hard to win at Vandy because anytime you have some good talent, they always leave for more money or a bigger school and the portal. And Vanderbilt, even though they play in the toughest conference in college football, they don't prioritize football as much as they should. They're the Harvard of the SEC. They only care about academics. And if that's the case, they probably should just move on to a different conference that cares more about academics than they do football, because last year when Vanderbilt played, you could tell how unserious they were about football because they were playing games in a home stadium that was under construction. Literally, if you watch Vanderbilt play last year, they were playing games at a home stadium that was not finished. They're undergoing renovations, and it was just so ugly to watch because it's like, dude, you mean to tell me that y'all didn't have no other place y'all could have played football at? You're playing football in a stadium that's not finished? Yeah, that shows me how unserious you are about trying to win in the toughest conference in America. And if Clark Lee can find a way to get the 6 wins this year, there's definitely a strong argument for him winning Coach of the Year because Vanderbilt has questions at nearly every position. They do have a pretty decent quarterback coming in. They got the quarterback from New Mexico State. Remember when Auburn got upset against that random team at home? Yeah, he was the dude who was at the helm underneath center when New Mexico State shocked Auburn. So maybe Vanderbilt could surprise us since they could have a decent QB, but the wide receiving core just isn't there. The offensive line is rough, and defensively, they don't really got too much talent there. It's just hard to see Vanderbilt having a good season this year. Florida, I have them going 5-7, 2-6 in SEC play. The problem I have for Florida this year doesn't have anything to do with talent. It's the coaching. Billy Napier and the few seasons that he's been at Florida, they haven't really made any progress. And I get that progress isn't always linear, but for Florida to not be bowl eligible any year is unacceptable. And the excuses that folks like to make about Billy Napier is that, well, he inherited such a bad program when he first got there because Dan Mullen didn't recruit that well. Let's not act like Dan Mullen was recruiting 1-star and 2-star guys. Like, there was a good enough amount of talent that he won 6 games year 1. And then we get into year 2, they go 5-7. But they had a lot of close losses due to bad clock management, poor in-game decision-making. Let's not forget when he had the 12, 13 players on the field. This just is a team that under Billy Napier, They're not disciplined. They're not ready to play. His play calling isn't that good neither. If Florida ends up having a good season, it's because Billy Napier finally took a step up as a head coach. And I just think at this point, we know what he is. He's a good G5 coach, but he's not meant to be coaching at a P4 level. It doesn't matter how tough Florida's schedule is, because when you're in the SEC, you're always going to have a tough schedule due to the implications of conference realignment. So I got Florida going 5-7 this year. They definitely are a team that could surprise us all if the coaching improves, because this record prediction has nothing to do with talent. And that's what I keep arguing with you Florida folks, man. You Florida folks keep saying, we got a good team, JT. We're way too talented to win anything less than 6 games. You could have made that same argument last year. The problem is your coaching. Go on Billy Napier's Instagram page. He posted a family photo at the beach, and all you see in the comment section is, your play calling's horrible. Give it up. I can't wait for you to get fired. I don't see it with Florida this year, and I also think Billy Napier gets the boot once the season ends. South Carolina, I have them going 7-5, 4-4 in the conference. I think the Gamecocks are in for a bounce back year. Shane Beamer, his first 2 years down there, greatly overachieved. Everybody thought it was going to be a rebuild when he first got down there, but he turned that thing around pretty fast. Of course, we're not going to forget their crazy end of the season run in 2022 when they upset Tennessee, ended their playoff hopes. Then the following week, they also upset Clemson. But last year, things went haywire because the offensive line was a disaster. They had a bunch of guys go down early. Their defense was pretty good, but offensively, they just didn't have enough juice. This year, you get Rocket Sanders from the transfer portal. You got a young, promising quarterback in Lenore Sellers, who a lot of Gamecock fans are really excited about. You got Nick Harbor, who was a 5-star recruit from the 2023 recruiting cycle. He was a top 15 rated player in that class. This dude is a sane athlete. He was fast enough where he could have potentially qualified to be in the Olympics right now. And this dude is built like a freight, 6'5", 240 pounds. And they are saying that he could be faster than Tyreek Hill. So they got a lot of freaks on that squad going into this season. They got experienced defense. Their coaching staff feels that their front seven is the most talented that it's been in the last couple of years. You're going to have an experienced defense. You're going to have an offense that they may not have a lot of depth and talent at wide receiver, but on the offensive line, if they can just play at an average level and you get competent quarterback play out of Lenore Sellers, South Carolina, with the easy out-of-conference schedule that they have, they're going to be able to at least get the 4 wins potentially, and then they can find a way to steal a couple of wins. I get that they got some tough games at home, but everybody knows that it's really difficult to win on the road in college football. So they definitely are one of those teams that under Shane Beamer, like he has showed us in the past, they have the capability of pulling off some major upsets based off what we saw them do the end of 2022. So I got South Carolina going 7-5. LSU, I know a lot of you guys are going to be extremely upset with this prediction, but I got them going 7-5, 4-4 in SEC play. I love their new defensive staff. You got Blake Baker, who was the former defensive coordinator the last couple of years at Missouri. He's going to be calling plays on defense now for them. You got Bo Davis, the best defensive line coach in college football, but they still aren't as talented as what they need to be on that side of football. I know that sounds ridiculous to say because we're talking about LSU. They always recruit at a pretty high level, but in the transfer portal, there were a lot of guys that they were trying to get that they were unable to get, such as the defensive tackle from TCU who ended up picking Oklahoma over them. So they still have some concerns on their interior D-line. The back end of their secondary, I still have major concerns about as well. Offensively, we know that they can score points with the best of them. They got great receivers. Garrett Nussmeier is going to have a fantastic season. They got one of the best offensive lines going into this year. But they're pretty much going to be all offense. And their defense is going to improve, but I don't think you're going to see a major night and day improvement. They are going to be better than what they were last year because that defense in 2023 was the worst that they had in program history. But at best, they have a top 70 defense. Until I see more out of that side of the ball, I don't think LSU is going to be a playoff team. And I think there's a strong chance that Brian Kelly has quietly become overrated. When he first came into the SEC, he was a big fish in a big pond, but now he's a big fish in a big pond with a lot of other big fishes, because you got Mike Elko in this conference now. You got Kalen DeBoer in the SEC now. There are way more better coaches now than what they were when Brian Kelly first took the job down there in Baton Rouge. And the thing with Brian Kelly is that he always makes a bunch of excuses. At this point, when are you going to start producing? I think this is going to be a huge down year for LSU in 2024 that they have coming up. Next up, we got Auburn. We're going into year 2 of the freeze era. And I got them going 8-4, which may be a bit surprising to a lot of you guys out there. But Auburn, if they were playing in a different conference like the Big 12 or the SEC, they could be good enough where they could win 9 or 10 games. But the SEC is just so oversaturated with good teams that it's hard to see Auburn being able to break out of that middle of the bunch. Because this is a roster that has a lot of young guys that they're going to be dependent on, such as that freshman wide receiver, Kim Coleman, who was a stud coming out of high school. He was going off all throughout spring. But Payton Thorne, he isn't really that impressive. He could improve, but I'm not expecting to see Michigan State Payton Thorne return. And although Hugh Freeze is one of the better offensive minds in the country, there's only so much you can do when you have a limited quarterback. And if you would have had a better quarterback, such as when you were playing Georgia, you possibly could have won that game. Payton Thorne holds this team back a little bit, but with the way their schedule lines up and how much of an advantage it is playing at Jordan-Hare Stadium, I can see them pulling off a couple of upsets and find a way to sneakily get to 8 wins this year. Next up, we got Missouri. I have Mizzou going 8-4 this year. This is one of the most overrated teams going into this season. A good amount of people believe that they're going to get into the playoffs this year. I don't see that. Missouri does have a promising future under Eli Drinkwitz. They are recruiting at a really good level, and they do return a lot of production on offense from last year's unit, but they lost a lot on defense. They lost their defensive coordinator as well. And what people don't talk about enough about Missouri is that for as good as what last year was, there were a few games that they won that they probably should have lost. You know, you had a huge 60-something yard field goal to beat Kansas State. You nearly lost to Florida. They had a few close wins that they had that if the ball would have bounced in a different direction, they would have been losses. Still was a great season, not going to take anything away from that. But this year, people are living off the recency bias. And they haven't recruited at a level to show me that they're going to be able to maintain the level of success they had in 2023 consistently for the next couple of years. Missouri, to me, looks like one of those programs that every 2 or 3 years, they're going to be poised for a big breakout year where they win maybe 9 or 10 plus games. But for the most part, I view this program as a 7-1 team consistently until I can see more consistency out of the recruiting. Texas A&M, I got them at 7-5, 5-3 in conference play. You may be a little puzzled as to why I have them above Missouri, because Missouri has an 8-4 record. But Texas A&M is 7-5. Well, Texas A&M, I think it's going to be better in conference play than what Missouri's going to be. 5-3, I do think that their schedule is pretty favorable until you get to the end of the season when you got to play Texas. Your schedule really starts to ramp up. But Texas A&M does have a lot of upside this year to where they possibly could be a 10-win team, and maybe they could end up playing in the SEC championship, because think about it. If Mike Elko was able to win at Duke, you can win anywhere, especially at a school like A&M where you have access to unlimited resources. They've done a really good job of using the portal. You got solid quarterback in Connor Wigman coming back, even though he is still fairly unproven. Based off the small sample size that he showed us last year, if he can improve off what he did and the small amount of action that he got last year before his injury, he could be one of the better quarterbacks in college football this year. They got a fantastic group of wide receivers. They got players on offense. The question is, how's that offensive line going to look? Their defense should be really good, and they got a really good defensive staff. I just think with Texas A&M, they're going to start out hot the first half of the season, and then the second half of the year, that's when they're going to start to fall off just a tad bit, and that's why I got them going 7-5, 5-3 in SEC play. Tennessee, I got the Vols going 9-3, 5-3 in conference play. There's a lot to love about the Vols this year. You got Nico Imaviava, who was the second best quarterback coming out of his recruiting class not too long ago. They were flying this dude out on recruiting visits on a private jet. If you're getting flown out on a private jet, you got to be one of those ones. And when I look at Nico Imaviava, I see Trevor Lawrence, but times 100 athleticism. This dude has a really good arm as well. He has the ability to make every single throw. He doesn't have the cannon that Joe Milton had, but he's not too far off. And he had an outstanding debut in their bowl game win against Iowa. And the supporting cast that he has around him is also going to be really good. Remember, a reason for why Tennessee's offense took a step back in 2023 was because they had a good amount of injuries that they dealt with at wide receiver. Bro McCoy got injured. He's back fully healthy. You got Squirrel White, who comes back. You got Chris Brazil, who's a transfer from Tulane. He's going to have a big impact. Don't forget about Deontay Thornton, who transferred from Oregon last year. I believe he also got beat up down the stretch due to injuries. So not only are you going to have a talented wide receiving core, but you got a lot of depth down there. So you're going to see a way more efficient passing attack out of Tennessee in 2024 than what we saw last year. And their offensive line is going to be really good too. They returned 3 out of 5 starters on that unit. This defense, though, is not getting talked about enough. When you think about Tennessee, you think about them being a finesse team, and you normally don't think of them being that good defensively. Well, last year, surprisingly, they were one of the more physical teams defensively in the SEC. And imagine me telling you that Tennessee has one of the best defensive lines in college football going into this year. You got James Pierce, who is expected to be a top 3, top 5 pick at next year's draft, along with a lot of other really talented guys on that D-line as well. Their secondary is a concern, but when you run the amount of plays that Tennessee does offensively, your defense is never going to be that good. But Tennessee, defensively this year, though, they're going to be good enough where they don't need to have a top 50, top 60 defense. All they need is for their defense to show up in big moments, which they definitely are capable of due to how good they're going to be up front. They're talented. They got tons of depth on the defensive line. Tennessee potentially could be a 10-win team, and they definitely are one of those dark horse contenders to get into the college football playoffs. Kentucky, I have the Wildcats going 9-3 this year, 5-3 in conference play. Some of you guys may be like, JT, what the hell are you doing? Are you high as hell doing this today? I promise you I'm perfectly sober. Y'all are really sleeping on Kentucky this year, man. Everybody says to win in the SEC, you gotta have good trench play. That's what Kentucky's going to have this year. They got an experienced offensive line. They have a fantastic defensive line. A lot of those guys that they have this year on the D-line are going to be playing on Sundays next year. Their secondary is inexperienced, but they have a lot of guys that they're going to be starting this year that, yeah, they are inexperienced, but they were highly touted coming out of high school. This is probably the most talented defense that Kentucky has had from a recruiting standpoint under Mark Stoops. They also got a really good linebacker who transferred from Georgia. And if Brock Vandagriff ends up panning out, I really believe Kentucky could shock us all, and they possibly could make it to the SEC championship this year. They got good receivers. Dane Key, Barian Brown are a really underrated wide receiver duo. And they don't get talked about enough because they didn't get the opportunity to showcase how good they truly were because Devin Leary was such a massive disappointment. But if Brock Vandagriff ends up being a home run that they got out of the transfer portal, this is a really dangerous team. And remember, Kentucky, with the transfer portal, they've had their fair share of hits and misses. Remember, before Devin Leary, they had Will Levis, who was pretty good. He led them to a 10-win season not too long ago. And Kentucky is one of those programs that every once in a while, they come out of nowhere and they pull off a 9-10-win season. This is definitely one of those years that you can see Kentucky have a big year and then they kind of fall off for the next 2 years and they disappear. This is a really talented team that Mark Stoops has coming into 2024. I get that their schedule isn't easy, but with how good they're going to be up front, I believe Brock Vandagriff is going to give them solid quarterback play. And if he ends up delivering on those expectations, look out for the Wildcats this year. I see this being a 9-win team. I got Oklahoma up next. I got the Sooners going 9-3 this year, 5-3 in conference play as well. This is the biggest sleeper team in the SEC approaching this season. Nobody talks about how good Oklahoma's defense is going to be this year. This is going to be one of the best defenses in this conference last year. They were outstanding last year. They were one of the best teams in the nation at forcing takeaways. They got a talented, experienced, and super deep secondary, man. You got guys like Billy Bowman. You got Danny Stutzman at linebacker, who's one of the best defensive players in the SEC this year. Offensively, you got talent there as well. You're loaded at wide receiver. You're going to have Gavin Sawchuk at running back. This dude was going on the tear the last few weeks of last year. Jackson Arnold. He was a top 5 quarterback coming out of that 2023 recruiting class. He was the Elite 11 MVP a while back. And there are some high expectations placed upon his shoulders going into this year because remember, Dylan Gabriel ended up transferring and going to Oregon. People think that Brent Venables just gave Jackson Arnold the job. No, Dylan Gabriel just like, I don't think I'm going to be able to beat out Jackson Arnold, so I might as well just go ahead and go elsewhere. So that shows you just how good Jackson Arnold could be this year. And in that bowl game against Arizona, although they lost that game, he showed a lot of promise. It's just that he was very hot and cold in that game. He started out a little bit cold in the first quarter. Then he started to heat up in the second and third. And then in the fourth quarter, he went back to reverting to being what he was in the first quarter, ice cold. But if he can take better care of the football, he can be a really good quarterback for the Sooners this year, man. Really good athleticism. He has a dynamic arm. He's very good throwing the football when he gets outside the pocket. He can do a lot of improvising when things break down, which is why I'm not too concerned about the offensive line. That's what most Sooner fans are. Dylan Gabriel isn't the athlete that Jackson Arnold is. Jackson Arnold reminds me a lot of what Johnny Manziel was during his playing days at Texas A&M. So look out for the Sooners this year. They're going to have a great defense. Offensively, their offense is going to be good enough to put up points with the best of them because the SEC has a lot of teams that Oklahoma plays this year that have some major concerns defensively. So this is a team that I don't see them winning anything less than 8 games at the worst. At best, they could win the SEC this year. That's how good they are. They've recruited at the top 10 level. They do a really good job of developing players that they recruit out of high school. They've hit the transfer portal and also have filled in some key areas of weakness, such as their pass rush and their interior defensive line. This is one of the most complete teams entering the SEC this season, and that's why I have them going 9-3, 5-3 in conference play. Ole Miss is a team on the rise. Last year, they won the most games that they've ever had in program history. Lane Kiffin has done a really good job of building up Ole Miss through the transfer portal and also recruiting. And many people believe that they could be in the SEC championship because they do have a pretty favorable schedule. But I got them going 9-3 because I do see them taking a couple of upset losses, especially some of the road teams that they have to play. But you do get the luxury of playing Georgia at home, even though you do have home field advantage in that game, and you are a more improved team this year than what you were last year when you played Georgia. I still see Georgia winning that game, and I could see them having a couple of upsets there, but I got them going 9-3. They should still be good enough where they potentially could qualify to be in the new expanded playoffs. But I don't know just how improved that defense is going to be. I know that they got a bunch of guys out of the transfer portal. A lot of the transfers that they were bringing in on the defense side of the football were top 100 rated players or better in the portal. But just because you're bringing in all this talent doesn't necessarily mean that it's all going to work out. There are going to be a few guys that they probably whiff on. And Pete Golden, I still don't believe he's a great defensive coordinator. There's a reason why he's at Ole Miss and why he didn't remain at Alabama under Nick Saban. So the jury's still out on him. I see Ole Miss being a little bit better than what they were last year, but still winning games a lot similarly to how they did in 2023. All offense, not really too much defense. Georgia, I have the Bulldogs going 10-2, 6-2 in conference play. Listen, Georgia very well could go undefeated, and they could win the SEC this year. They are probably the most talented team in this conference, but they got a really brutal road schedule this year. You got to go on the road and play Ole Miss, Texas, and Alabama. All three of those teams are good enough to win this conference, and they definitely are going to have the work cut out for them. And I think there's a possibility where you see Georgia losing 2 out of 3 of those matchups. As crazy as that may sound, but Texas, Ole Miss, and Alabama, the gap in talent between those teams compared to Georgia isn't really that wide. Georgia is better, but Ole Miss, Alabama, and Texas, they're not too far off, especially Alabama and Texas. Yes, they did lose Caleb Downs and a couple of other talented players to the portal, but there's still a lot of talent that remain there despite Nick Saban stepping down, retiring. And Kalen DeBoer, we saw what he did in his first 2 years at Washington. So imagine what he can do right out the gate with Nick Saban talent and plus the guys that follow him from Washington. Georgia, I got them going 10-2. They're still going to be a really good team. It's just that, unfortunately, with them having such a tough schedule, that's why I have them going 10-2. And even if they are a better team than what Texas, Ole Miss, and Alabama are, we know that in college football, a lot of upsets occur when you have to go on the road. And that's why I see Georgia having 2 losses, but I still have them as a lock to get into the playoffs, and they definitely are still going to be a factor in the national championship picture. Texas, I also have the Longhorns going 10-2, 6-2 in conference play, but I have them making it to the SEC championship game. Defensively, there are some major concerns. You lose 2 outstanding interior defensive linemen in Tavondre Sweat, and you also lose the dang, the other name of him, Byron Murphy. So you lose Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat to the NFL. It's going to be really difficult for them to replace those guys. Now, they did hit the transfer portal and brought in a couple of guys via the portal to replace them, but I don't really think the replacements are going to live up to anywhere being. I don't think the replacements for Sweat and Murphy are going to be anywhere as good as what those guys were. And I still believe that from a secondary standpoint, they still may be a little bit inconsistent. Plus, you did lose the best defensive line coach in college football and Bo Davis to LSU. So I think defensively, Texas takes a little bit of a step back. I think offensively, they have the capability to be better than what they were last year. Their offensive line is a top 10 unit going into this year. You're loaded at wide receiver. It just all depends on how better is Quinn Ewers going to be in his final season down there compared to what we've seen out of him the last couple of years in Texas. He isn't bad. It's just that he's been a little inconsistent and he can get rattled at times and get out to a slow start, as we saw in their semifinal loss to Washington. So I got them going 10-2, making it to the SEC championship game. And the team I have finishing with the best record in this conference this year, it's the Alabama Crimson Tide, baby. I know that Nick Saban retiring definitely has people doubting Alabama this year, and for a really good reason. We know that Nick Saban is the greatest head coach in college football history, and losing him definitely is a significant loss. But you replaced him with the best possible replacement in Kalen DeBoer. And I believe Kalen DeBoer is going to be the second coming of Nick Saban. Everywhere Kalen DeBoer has been, he's won, and he's done it at a high level. When he was winning NAIA national championships at his alma mater, he never really lost too many games there. He was successful at Fresno State. He did a really good job the 2 years down at Washington, turned that team from being nearly irrelevant to becoming a national championship contender in the span of 2 years. And he only had 3 losses during that span, including smacking Dan Lanning in Oregon twice. And a lot of people hold Dan Lanning in very high regard. So if he can do what he did at Washington in 2 years, imagine what he can do at Alabama, still having a lot of talent that Nick Saban recruited. And you do have Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is going to be a fantastic fit in Kalen DeBoer's system, because Kalen DeBoer, well, he had a lot of success calling plays for Michael Penix at Washington last year was in the vertical passing game. And Alabama with Jalen Milroe, he throws the deep ball more accurately than he throws short and intermediate passes. So you're going to see Jalen Milroe improve tremendously under Kalen DeBoer. And I see Alabama not just making it to the SEC championship game this year, but I also am picking them to win that SEC this year also, year one under Kalen DeBoer. This dude is a stud. I get that there are some people that are skeptical about how good Alabama's going to be under him in his first season, because they are replacing Nick Saban, and there is a lot of pressure that comes with taking over for a coach that has this much history, especially when they're going to be naming the field after him. But I don't think there was a better replacement for Nick Saban than Kalen DeBoer. He has a great track record. Everywhere he's been, he's won, and he's done it fairly fast. And with Alabama still having a top 5 roster, they pretty much still have the second or third most talented team in this conference. And a lot of their tougher games, they get to play in Tuscaloosa. And Alabama has only lost a handful of games at home. So these are my SEC record predictions for the upcoming 2024-2025 college football season. Leave your record predictions down in the comment section down below. I'm pretty sure all of you guys are going to agree with me.